Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast.
Andy.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, good. Let me just start my video. There we go.
All right.
Better.
You've got a better setup than I do at the moment. I have a good setup, but I'm not in the right room.
I won't use that. I won't use the headphones. They're not actually plugged in. I just realised. I've actually got this mic for. I'm turning my book into an audio book, so it's all borrowed material.
I started to do a chapter of something I wrote. I was gonna record an audiobook. I got about the first chapter done. I went, man, this is gonna take more time than I've got right now. So
Yeah, it is time consuming, but it probably took me, I don't know, probably 15 hours to get the whole thing done. It's about 7.5 hours.
yeah.
So, in case of sitting, I had a friend who's an audio tech kind of show me how to do all this stuff, and he just walked me through it. So I've got it to the raw material now. I've got to decide whether to Fiverr it out to someone and get it, spec'd up for production, or whether I can just upload it. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, if you don't know anybody who does that, that's somebody. I do know somebody who's a good tech for that kind of work.
Okay.
If you need, he does it all remotely,
Yeah,
of course.
I've got guys over here. It's more like trying to find someone who's going to do it for
Not
$10 an hour rather than
thousands.
$50 an hour, or a couple $100 an hour, probably in our case.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this guy, I don't know. He's fair. He's not. It's not his main thing, but he's really good. He's been in radio
Okay.
for the longest time, and so it's kind of a side gig for him. He's
Yeah.
actually the one that encouraged me to do my book on audio, and he said he would do all the editing for free. I
Uh,
really should take him up on it.
you should. It's a good offer. If all you've got to do is record your voice, it's a really good offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man. Well, you know what? I'm going to pass this recording to Eric, who I normally do the podcast with, and
Yep.
I know him, and he is not much of an editor, so he's just going to put everything I record up there if I'm not careful. So, and I also have an appointment in 47 minutes, so
That's
we
cool.
should probably jump in. But the good thing about the Faith Over Breakfast podcast, which this will be on, is he and I we've made it. The premise of the podcast is you just sit down like you're sitting down to breakfast. We used to get a breakfast together before we were on the radio, and we realized we liked the breakfast more than the radio, and so we said, man, we wish we could just record that conversation. So that's where the name of our podcast comes from. So
Yeah, cool.
it's meant to be the type of conversation you just sit down, maybe you're meeting each other and you just jump right in.
Cool. Yeah, cool. No, that sounds good. Sounds good. So, I mean, I read your book a while back now, but
And
yeah,
which one was it? The bivocationalism one with
yeah,
Sean?
part-time pastoring, was that the one?
That's right. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, similar kind of story. So you do handyman work, is that right?
Well, I don't now. I did. So that's how I kind of got I got started off with church planting, and I started a handyman business at the same time. And then it morphed. I met a guy who worked at a coffee shop, and we were in some similar circles. He was in church circles, and he is a really good craftsman. And I hired him for this job that was a little out of my league, but
Hmm.
we pulled it off really well together. And we ended up deciding to start more of a custom shop, a furniture and finish shop.
Okay.
And doing that was a blast. I mean, one of our early jobs got published, and we became decently known around town, and
Nice.
and a little bit out of town, I suppose. And that became the big thing. Honestly, the church was small, and that felt like it
Mhm.
became the big idea. And then a couple of things happened. Number one, it was growing at some point, and I think I actually began to like it less. I liked, or I should say, my role in it less.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing a lot
Church or the
more.
business?
What's that? Oh, the business,
Yeah.
which is interesting because I enjoy business, but I think I ended up doing mostly customer relations and sales, really. And the little crew we had was doing the on-site work that was fun, but I also couldn't necessarily handle that schedule either. So it was the right place for me, but not my favorite part.
Yeah, right.
And then COVID hit, and we lost two kind of restaurant coffee shop jobs that had big tickets on them, and we just didn't know what
Yeah,
was going
right.
to happen with that.
Yep.
And so essentially in that moment I thought, I'm not liking my role as much. I don't know how long this pandemic's going to last. And we made a decision. We had a lease was ending on our shop, and we had 3 sections of an industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
We decided to downsize to one and make the company manageable just for the other guy, just for Sean.
Yep.
To where in the worst case scenario, we figured he could handle it. And so I backed out at that time. Looking back, we probably would have been able to weather it.
Yeah.
But at the time we didn't know. So that changed. We had started a retail store. So I
Okay.
held on to the retail store, ran the retail store actually up until last month.
Mm-hmm.
And then now my version of bivocationalism is kind of interesting. I'm actually I do some work with our denomination and kind of some startup coaching, if you will.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing this evening.
Okay.
And then the other piece is this year I'm going to spend some of the hours on a book project, memoir about friendship, because I have a tragic but cool story where my best friend died pretty tragically 18 years ago. But some of his other friends and I are going to drive a Volkswagen to Wrigley Field in Chicago and do kind of a travel memoir out of it. So that's me. How about you? What's your version?
Yeah. Okay. So I was a physical education teacher way back. So I've always been pretty much bivocational. Phys ed teacher, youth pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Senior pastor gig for about 3 or 4 years, full time. We really wanted to plant a church. We headed off to plant a church. Um, we built a couple of houses as investments. It was during the
Yeah.
GFC when the banks were giving away crazy money. So we built a house, made some fast money. I built another one, didn't make so much money, and I ended up doing some of the finishing myself.
Yeah.
And discovered I really enjoyed it, and then discovered how much people were getting paid to do irrigation and
Yeah.
lay turf. And look, it's just ridiculous over here. It's $100 an hour
Yeah.
easily. So we were, I remember during that really enjoying it and realizing that, with discipleship and ministry, you're never finished. Everything's always ongoing. Whereas, when you lay lawn, when you put sprinklers in, you go, job done, look at that, how good, go home, get paid, all over.
You
So,
probably resonated to what I mentioned something like that in part-time
yeah,
pastoring. That, yeah.
exactly. I mean, I read that and thought, yeah, okay, I know that story. It's nice to
Mm-hmm.
achieve something.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I said to my wife, "Hey, I might start a business," and she laughed, and then I said, "Look, we'll just do something simple around the local area because the area we had actually moved from the church where I was senior pastor. We'd taken 4 other families and we'd bought blocks of land in this new subdivision, all within walking distance. The idea of being a missionary community in a new
Yeah.
suburban area, it didn't go anywhere near the plan. It was really, really tough.
Yeah.
But the business came out of it and discovered that, I was quite good at it and discovered I
Mhm.
enjoyed it. And then after about 12, 18 months, I just remember thinking, I reckon Paul knew what he was on about, I reckon
Yeah.
Paul knew clues. He went, okay, this stuff pays the bills. It puts me in the midst of all these people that I really want to be around. I was
Yep.
hanging out with more non-Christian people as we call it a reticulation, as a retic bloke than I was as a pastor. And
Mm-hmm.
then we took off, did a lap of Australia, as you do sometimes over here. We just sort of put the kids in the car, put a caravan on behind and took off for 6 months. As we traveled around, we'd done another investment, which went south, like south at tune of 250 grand. Came
Yeah.
home to a big debt, and this little Baptist church had picked us up. Our church plant had fallen over. So we had 2 days a week in this little Baptist church, and basically I had to make that business fire or we were going to go broke. And so I put my foot down, and for 15 years ran that business, and pastored that church, and in the process planted another church where we live now. And I've since sold the irrigation business to a young guy who's a pastor as well. So I met with him yesterday. I still do some discipling and mentoring with him, helping
Yeah.
with business and ministry. And now I run a business in caravan weighing. I don't know if that's a thing in the US, but over here, when you travel, like if you got I think you guys call them trailers, you
Yeah.
need to know the weight of your car and your trailer, um,
Oh,
for legal reasons, insurance reasons, safety reasons. So I do that, and I also put diesel heaters in caravans or trailers, as you guys call
yeah.
them, and that keeps me going pretty much over winter. And summer, I kind of cruise and go surfing, so it's pretty
Nice.
good. And in terms of pastoring, we had two churches that we were leading one, and then we planted the other, and we handed them both over to two younger guys. So we're in that space in life at the moment where kind of floating free.
Mm.
The intention was to be available. So the caravan weighing business, where we're going to take on the road, we could travel to country towns and help little rural churches out, and hang
Yeah.
around, put the sign up. That was the plan. Last year in March, our son died. The 21-year-old son died,
Wow.
and that sort of blew things up a bit. And so we're sort of in that kind of crazy life just turned to custard space where you
Yeah.
go, and we're still figuring out who we are and what we're doing.
Yeah. Wow.
But business runs, there's still ministry stuff we do. It's none of it's paid these days, but it's still really good stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, hard place, but it's starting to become a bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about Sean, who I wrote that book with. So book I wrote, just to name this for people who will listen in, Part-Time Pastoring with Sean Benish, and you wrote, Andrew, name your book. And
The future is bi-vocational. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So that's kind of how we connected, was over the books.
Yeah.
But Sean, who I wrote that with, he encouraged me to write that with him. He had a little bit more of a platform than I had.
Okay.
But he has ended up doing less church, more business. He's running a coffee company and doing trail biking, which he's always loved both of those things,
Mm,
really the whole way.
mm,
And that's his emphasis these days. If there's, I don't know if there's ministry, it's subtle, and he's not really making a big deal about it.
yeah. Right.
I kind of ended up in the opposite boat, in a way, though I still wonder. I'm 42. We'll see where it goes. But
Yeah.
I'm doing less of the business than I was, and more of the ministry. But it's interesting how that works for different people, and I've
Mm,
been curious about that in the bivocational conversation. The two things I've been thinking about are, number one, that bivocationality often has kind of a direction that might lead you, maybe it's not always this 50-50 experience.
yeah.
It might lead you in one direction or the other more.
Mm,
And there's probably seasons of time. I could see myself doing another, I don't know if it'd be, maybe I'd start another business. I guess I could see myself doing something like that if it were
mm,
right later on.
mm,
But I've been thinking about that, and then I've been thinking about, with time, and maybe these are parallel concepts, that the more overlap and kind of the more, what would be the right word? The more overlap, the more shared focus between your ministry and your work, the better. And sometimes I think that leads people to realize, you know what I really love to do is serve and help people out. And so the
mm,
business actually gives me the most opportunity to do that. And
mm.
sometimes, the church, you get gobbled up in the politics of it and in Eugene Peterson's words, running the damn church, right? Um,
Yeah.
which is real. And then, but then, business can have its own version of that too.
Yeah.
Anyway, what have you thought about any of that? You've got a little
Yeah.
life experience
I
on
have
there.
intentionally kept my business. So, like, had this irrigation business that never. I used to run it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
Mm-hmm.
and I would do church work Monday, Friday, and whatever happened that needed to be done on Sunday. So I was really conscious. I did not want to grow the business. So I'd get the telemarketers, the spammers
Yeah,
ringing, and you want to grow your business. You want to make more money. I'd say, no, I don't want to make any more money. I've got enough
I'm
money.
good. Yeah,
Please help me slow it down a bit. I'm really
yeah.
confused the hell out of them. But so the same with the business I got at the moment. I want to run it, 2 or 3 days a week, um, which allows time. Honestly, it allows time for very fluid ministry at the moment. So,
Yeah.
so we do bits and pieces around the place that help different people out and different churches out. I do a fair bit of mentoring with younger leaders. As I say, none of that's paid these days, but it doesn't need to be. So I don't stress about it. And it's kind of nice to. One of the things I really like about the business was you can make way more money in a much
Mm,
shorter time doing business than you can as a pastor.
yeah.
So, in I could make the same amount of money in a day as I would make as a pastor in 3 days.
Yeah.
Um, so you kind of go, look, I've only got to do 3 days of business, and then I can, twist the dials on pastoring and work things around. So yeah, look, I have loved being a solo. Well, my wife and I are in as partners, so she looks after the finances. But I had a guy in our church one time say to me, when my business started to really ramp up, and I got frustrated, he said, "Look, let's go partners. I'll go in with you, and we'll be able to do it together." And as I was writing about this in my own journal, I said, "I value freedom, simplicity, autonomy.
Mm,
I want to be able to do what I want to do when I want to do it and go on
yeah.
holidays, knock work back, pick work up." And I realized to work with him, I was going to lose all those three things.
Sure.
So I actually trained him to run his own business. So he became one of my competitors. And it was fine. I mean, I said, mate, I'll come work with me. I'll show you how to do it, help you get set up. I've done that with a few guys, help them get set up in the same industry. And they've become competitors as much as friends. But there was plenty of work out there. So
Yeah.
I really valued that autonomy of being a sole trader or being on my own. That's probably the thing I've really gleaned from it.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I'm curious about, so in Tucson, Arizona, we are rated in America as one of the more post-Christian cities.
Okay. Yeah.
So meaning that there are a lot of people here who did not grow up with Christianity at all. And there's parts of our country that are very opposite to that, where everybody grows up with it and it feels built in and each have their challenges.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I've spent 1 month in Australia. My intern, Cruz, here is partially from Australia. His mom is, and he's lived a chunk of his life there. So I hear tidbits of, and I had my own experience of being around for a month.
Whereabouts
Um,
in Australia?
what's that?
Where did you go in Australia?
Really just Sydney and the Gold Coast.
Okay.
Hung around there. Yeah. But it was nice to have a longer period. That was unique, I
Mm.
guess, at least for me. I haven't been very many places for a month.
Yeah, sure.
But the when you were talking about pastoring, not paying as much, there are people in certain parts of the country here where pastoring's like the advantageous gig to get into. It's where you make the most money. Tucson, that is generally not the case. I assume Australia, generally not the case. So,
Australia. Yeah.
yeah. So tell us, I guess, talk about the culture of Australia and how that affects your thinking here. And I think the west coast of the U.S. is right behind you guys, in my mind.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of distance from Christendom.
Yep.
We're in Western Australia, Perth, Western Australia. So the city of Perth. It stretches like 120 kilometres north south. So it's
Oh,
it's really long, and it only goes about 30 or 40 kilometres towards the east, which is the hills. We live at like the very north end. It's a beachside kind of seaside village kind of thing. But yeah, Australia, very post-Christian. So you're familiar with Alan Hirsch and Mike
Yeah.
Frost and those guys? Yeah. So
Yeah.
so I was involved working with them for quite a while, working with Forge and doing that sort of stuff, training people for mission in the post-Christian world. And we've always made the assumption that no one is waking up on a Sunday morning thinking, "Hey, beautiful day, let's get along to church."
Yeah.
No one in Australia is, even Christians aren't doing that for a large
Yeah.
part these days. No? So certainly not non-Christians. So it just takes a whole different way of approaching things to engage this culture. Um, you got to be gentle. You got to be smart. You got to be savvy. You got to be, got to be willing to go there when people want to go there.
Yeah.
We have a group that meets in our street, which sort of evolved out of a good friend of mine. We met each other 8 years ago and they moved in. Told me he was an atheist, didn't want to know anything about faith. All good, no worries. And then one day he says, "Hey, look, I've been thinking about God. Have you and Janelle ever thought about having something in your home where people could come and ask questions and explore this sort of stuff?" I said, "Oh, look, there's an idea."
Yeah.
Anyway, all families gathered in our home, and most of them still aren't Christians.
Yeah.
Most of them are still exploring faith and still curious. So we have a group. You familiar with Alpha over there?
Yeah.
So we don't do Alpha. All right. Alpha is like Alpha's way too far down the track. We
Yeah.
started this group that was basically where we come and discuss life's great big questions, LGBTQ. Um,
Yeah.
so we come and discuss life's great big questions. And it started off with, let's talk about a spiritual experience you've had.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
once we're able to acknowledge everyone had a spiritual experience, then we're able to start talking about how you decipher what kind of spirituality we're talking about. And when Sam died last year, they just said to us one night, "Why don't you come and tell us how you're processing that?" So we
Mm.
did. And we talked about where our faith provided anchor points. And that night they said, "Look, I can't remember how it happened, but around the table, I said, we should start reading the Bible. What about read the Bible? Could we read the Bible, Andrew?" I said, "We can read the Bible if you want to." They said, "Let's read the Bible." So we started in John. We've leaped along to John. We're in John chapter 7 now. We've gone through questions of, Jesus saying, "I'm the only way." And they kind of go, "No, we don't see it that way. We think there's many ways."
Yeah.
And in that group, I have to simply go, "Okay,
Yeah.
you'll see like that." And we just simply have a conversation. At the end of the day, I am not trying to convince anyone of anything. And in fact, I put the scriptures out there. We read the Bible and I go, "What do you reckon that's saying?" So last week we read Jesus saying, "Eat my flesh and drink my blood." Okay, over to you guys. What do you reckon? I said, "Well, it's clearly not literal. Thank God for that." And we had a conversation around that. So look, it's very early days for some. That said, one of the guys rang me the other day and said, "Hey, I want to get baptized." I said, "Really?" I said, "What's been going on there?" Anyway, since he joined the group, he's been started coming to church. He said, "Look, I've been watching from the outside. I want in." Um, I explained baptism to him, dying and rising, and that's what I want. So we're going to baptize him in a couple of weeks' time. So
Yeah.
look, there are others who are just nowhere near that, and there are a couple who are Christians, but that's the kind of culture we're in. A very, very tread gently, tread carefully, think carefully. Yeah.
Yeah. My experience, because I was actually there for 2 of the 4 weeks with a church group that we were like kind of doing sort of a cross-cultural thing. My experience in Australia that was different than the Western United States was that people, at least in the Sydney area, felt they were fine to talk about stuff. They didn't feel bothered by that. Maybe less of a rush than Americans.
Okay.
Or I should say, I just got in trouble for saying Americans because there are the Americas. I got to get that right.
Yeah.
People in the United States,
Yeah.
less of a rush, but yeah, not a lot of, more of just a, hey, cool, interesting thoughts there, a lot of that response, which is, I felt was a pretty comfortable type of conversation to have. Whereas in the Western United States, I tended to feel like people were like, hey, all that stuff's annoying. I don't want to talk about it,
Okay.
So I felt like there was maybe it was more openness to chat, but
Maybe.
it was going to take a lot of time. Maybe that was how it
It
felt.
really
Yeah.
depends on where you go. Like, well, we used to get the Southern Baptist missionaries come over. The college students would come over during their mid-year break, and they'd come over and help us out with youth ministry for 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And they would come over gung ho, ready to convert Australia. And Australia would just kind of go, yeah,
Yeah.
nah, dude. That was always really challenging.
And that's probably what I experienced, but at least for me, from maybe as being from Tucson, I was like, well, that was a nice response, you know?
Yeah,
They
look,
seemed relaxed about saying no, you know?
maybe Aussies are pretty laid back. I don't know. Look, it's hard to be generic, as you know. I mean, Southern America is very different from where you are.
Entirely.
So,
Yeah.
and, but Australia, that said, Australia's pretty post-Christian all round. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't say there's no part of Australia where you go, well, if you go there, you'll definitely get a hearing and people will be up for it. We don't have a Tennessee type vibe.
Right.
Um,
Well, Andrew, I didn't know about your son till we started talking here. It was interesting so his name was Sam.
yeah.
Yeah, so the friend of mine who died, his name was Sam as well.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
it's, you know, part of even when I'm thinking about talking to a post-Christian culture, I've been paying a lot of attention to Andrew Root. Are you familiar with him?
I don't know. What's he written?
So he's written a few, like the Church in the Age of Secular Mysticisms is a recent one. He did a lot of stuff on youth work. He's kind of a mainline Lutheran guy, which is not typically the stream I just hear from. I just don't. But yeah, I heard a couple lectures of his, and something he's getting at was ringing, is making sense to me. So his new book is called Evangelism in an Age of Despair. And that's just coming out.
Yeah.
Anyway, he talks a lot about memoir, and I've dabbled in that. After my dad's death, I wrote a memoir as kind of my way of processing, and I ended up deciding I didn't mind sharing
How old were
it.
you when your dad died?
So let's see. I have to do math now. You're making me do math. I was probably, well, this would have been 6 years ago, so about 36-ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so I wrote a story out of that, and now I'm getting ready to write one about the friend, about Sam. So the interesting thing I've been thinking through is it is something I want to process. It is a meaningful story, but also when I've talked about him, his life, his death, when I've talked about friendship and how I've tried to process that over the years, I've found a lot more receptivity to talking about the bigger questions in life, right?
Yep.
And you just mentioned, sharing about your son's death and the receptivity you experienced in your home. That must have been so hard for you. Again, up to you how much you want to say about it, but facing despair.
Yeah.
How has that been a part of your, I guess, life as a Christian, and your witness, or however you want to put it?
It's interesting because I guess a lot of people would say we had the dream life. In fact, the last suburb we were in, they made ads for the suburb, where they had mum and dad, two blonde kids, and a Labrador, and we were the people in the ads. So we looked like those people who had the perfect life, and we had a really, really good life. So when Sam died, he drowned. He was a free diver, and he stayed down too long,
Wow.
and he blacked out. And when he died, uh, it was what's the word? Just it was earth shattering. I mean, it was all those things, but it was in terms of faith. It didn't smash probably my wife and my faith around because I'd actually written on my blog previous week. I've been having a conversation with his girlfriend about anchor points in life, in faith, and I'd
Yeah.
written mine down. Jesus is Lord, God is good, all these things, and I was able to go, God is still good. Jesus is still Lord. My daughter's really struggled. Um, Anger at God. Sam's
Yeah.
girlfriend, who was with him when he died, she's really struggled. Look, we've just had to. I don't know. Grief is not my happy place.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's happy, but the whole emotional thing is probably not my happy place. I'm more of a thinker.
Yeah. Me too.
Just sitting in it and kind of allowing it to smash around a bit has been, we just allowed ourselves to get smashed around for. We're actually heading off this week on Sunday across to the eastern states for 10 days. We're going surfing up the east coast, just a family holiday, the three of us. So that'll be hard, because
Yeah.
it's when there's three of you, you notice.
He should have been there. Yeah.
And he was the big personality. I'm an introvert. My daughter's an introvert. He was the crazy one. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Thanks for telling me about him. Thanks for telling
yeah.
us
No,
about him. Yeah.
really have to talk about. It's not one of those things that as much as it's emotional, it's not one of those things I wouldn't want to talk about. I
Yeah.
don't know how you feel about your friend. Obviously you want to share his story. Yeah,
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, I relate to what you were saying about emotions not being the happy place. I think for me, emotions are not only not a happy place, but they're a complicated place. I'm kind of scared of them sometimes,
yeah,
and in other people and in myself. And so my friend died. It was 18 years ago. I was in my 20s, and my version of dealing with it. So I mean, it's tragic. He was on his way to his wedding with his fiance, and she fell asleep at the wheel. We think rolled the vehicle, and she died on the scene.
wow.
And he
So they both
was
died together.
airlifted. What's that?
Oh, okay. So she died on the scene. He died
She
later.
died on the scene. He was airlifted, and then he died in the hospital. And so the wedding's like coming up, and I get a call at work from a family friend of theirs who says this happened. And she said, "You probably want to sit down. You might want to think about calling off work." And she told me, and my response was, I kind of in shock got off the phone and I just went back to work. It's like all I
Yeah,
knew what to do, right? It was like I could control that and
yeah.
everything. So it was, I showed up at the wedding and kind of, or sorry, at the funeral
Mm.
in kind of a fix it mode of who needs what, where do we put the chairs? And, one of our other friends was absolutely distraught. A lot of people were. And I look back with a little regret that I didn't know how to meet him there. I was kind of
Yeah.
unavailable, and that had to do with my own story and my own issues. And I wasn't trying to do that, but when I think I missed out on going there with some people and some friends. And
Yeah.
so for me, I had to do a little bit of growing, and God had to soften the heart. And then I came back to this story and went, I need to look all the way into that story. And so I've been spending time with my friend's parents lately, and got
Mm.
the okay to drive his car that we grew up driving, his Beetle, on this trip. And I'm getting together with a couple of his other friends who we kind of drifted apart after that.
Mm.
We're gonna
Mm.
reconnect
Yeah.
and see how it goes. And but yeah, it's one of those things that I think I'm ready for it now. I wasn't back then, and
Early 20s is you know,
tough time. Yeah,
yeah. I actually had Sam's best mate come around yesterday. His
yeah,
best friend became a Christian after he died,
yeah.
but he's still struggling with,
Oh yeah,
the loss of his best mate. So, he came around. He just texted me, said, "Can I come around and hang out and go surfing?" He said, "Sure." Anyway, I just came around. We chatted for 2 hours, and
yeah,
part of it is trying to make sense of it all, and trying to make sense of life. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
He's
And it
23. Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's about how old I was. I mean, I was like right in there, 23, 5. The dates
Yeah.
get fuzzy when I'm looking back that far, but Yeah, it's interesting though, because as painful as it is, what I've learned is other people are scared of that too, of going
Yeah.
there. But most people can resonate with it to some degree, and that's where they start asking the big questions. So his buddy Tony and I sat down for Chicago Dogs recently, and he told me a story about going to the World Series, and in that, and Tony's not a Christian, and
Yeah.
he knows that Sam was, and he knows I am.
Mm.
And but he tells me the story that's amazing. That's going to be in the book for sure. And
Mm.
he told me, he said, "Man, I'm not a Christian. I'm not it. But when I start, when I crack, when I start to consider it, it's when I think about this story, you know. And it's a painful story. It's a story of he should have been there, you know. And
Amazing. You're telling this story 20 odd years later, so it's obviously still stuck with you.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's yeah, I think it's my quest, but I've just realized going there, and that's one of the things Andrew Root says, that we're in a world where there's a lot of despair, and if you can't go there, meet people there,
Mm.
engage in some confession of causing the despair yourself, you're not going to be very effective. But in a and he talks a lot about post modernity, post Christendom. He says if you will go there, um, people are willing to talk, and they need
There's
it.
plenty of people who are there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess one of my reflections would be that up until that moment, my life hadn't really had too many dark spots. You
Mm,
know, my dad and I don't have a great relationship, and but nothing really. Been no major dramas. But when you get hit with something like this, people go, "Okay, so you do get what it's like to have a really significant life tragedy." Can certainly relate.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's wild that it's Sam's in both cases. Thanks for
yeah,
again.
yeah.
Thanks for telling me about it. How
Now look,
yeah, when you think about, I know this is kind of new for you, and but when you think about being his dad, moving forward, and a follower of Jesus, and a businessman, how do those relate to each other for you?
it's funny. I've been recording the book over the last few days, and I've realised how much of his story is in there.
Yeah,
Just he worked with me on numerous occasions, and I've just told stories about working with him and driving around with him and dealing with
yeah,
difficult customers with him, and yeah, well, we had a lot. We had a lot of experience in that
yeah,
space. Um, Going forward, I kind of go. I'm glad I'm 60. And I kind of go, I might have 25 good years left if the odds are equal, and they aren't equal. There's no guarantees of getting to 85, but then I'll see him again. So
yeah,
that's I never anticipated death. Death was always something you kind of think, no way.
yeah,
But I wouldn't say I look forward to it, but it's not as dark as it once was.
yeah.
Um, Sorry, what was the question, Andy?
Oh, well, yeah, I think you're talking about it. How do those things, how are they related to each other? You are his dad. You do love Jesus. You are, a entrepreneurial guy. Yeah, just curious how you
Yeah.
saw those things intersecting in your life.
Yeah, look, it's I think my biggest concerns these days are my daughter and his partner, because they were lined up to get married,
Mm,
and both of them are having a bit of a faith crisis, and we just have to be able to stand by and let them let them
yeah,
explode, let them do what they need to
yeah,
do. We can't fix them; they're adults, but we need to be there at the same time to talk with them. So that's probably our biggest concern is how are they going, and
yeah,
my son's partner's family, we really enjoyed them too. And it's like we're kind of connected now, and
yeah,
yet we're not. Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that
but
that binding person is not there, but there's a
Yeah.
binding tragedy. That's
Yeah.
different, but
Yeah.
real. Yeah.
Each other's lives. So yeah, look, it's still it's one of those things where I go, all right, I guess I'll just figure it out as I go. And
Yeah.
today, we're doing okay. Some days I mean, my wife has had volumes of grief, way more than I have in terms of expression. And some days I feel a little bit guilty that maybe I haven't grieved in the same way. You know that feeling.
Sure.
She worried that she can't get through it fast enough. And I look at myself and go, maybe I'm not,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
we
do
both
know that feeling.
we know that's rubbish, but it's
Yeah.
still what you feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're recording the audiobook. Will you write again? Do you know?
Yeah, I've got a book forming which may come out. I think it's going to be called "You're Trying Too Hard," and it's going to be about how we do mission and how we go about it. And I think based on look, it's experiential. From our time planning a church, we just went all guns blazing, and it didn't work out well. Uh,
Do you have a
and
burnout?
yeah,
Yeah.
this time we've just come in and just been who we are and found that God's been at work and it's been far more freeing and releasing. So maybe that will be the next book, but
Hmm.
I got to see. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's a book that I could imagine being hard to sell to the people who need to read it the most,
That's true.
but very important. Yeah.
It's like the bivocational book. There's no market for bivocational books at the moment. Well, not in Australia.
Yeah.
You do not get rich writing a book to a section of pastors. 1% of pastors. Or maybe it's 40%, but 39% of them don't want to be bivocational.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's true here too. A lot of, well, especially in the more Anglo community for us, it's being bivocational is kind of a, well, you're not doing so well thing.
Yeah,
If in the like the Hispanic community here, it's just assumed. It's just that's just what you do.
I
And
spoke to a guy from Philadelphia, an Aussie guy had come back from over there. He said, "Look, it's how things work over there. Everyone's bivocational."
yeah,
I thought, wow, he's in Sydney now and part of in one of the poorer areas doing exactly the same sort of stuff. But yeah, in Perth, for most people, it's like, well, if your church can't afford you, I suppose you got to get another job. And
yeah,
poor you.
yeah, yeah. I could see that. Um, yeah. Well, that's I hope you do write that book because I think that's important, and it's I feel like maybe I'm just on the very front edge of learning about that as you've described it. So I'd be happy to read it and
Yeah, sure.
to hear wisdom from someone that's said no. I've done it the other way now, and God shows up, and it's not all on you, buddy, and all
Yeah,
that. So yeah,
absolutely. What kind of church do you pastor? What
yeah,
place?
it's a unique one. So our church is called Mission Church. We're part of a denomination. We didn't start off that way, but that probably doesn't really help describe it at all.
Okay.
The thing I just heard this from somebody, and it was probably one of the more encouraging things I've heard in a while because basically she said we were doing a community event, and I asked what she liked about our church, and she was really kind of trying to think and figure it out, and she said something to the effect of I'm from Tucson, and I tried another church, and it was fine, but and this is a newer Christian.
Hmm.
But when I came to Mission, it felt like part of Tucson.
Hmm.
And I felt like I just was at home with people like me. And that
Hmm.
was the coolest thing to hear because that's what we were hoping to do. And, it's not always the feedback I get or whatever. And there's definitely people who, I've gotten the opposite feedback of, I've seen really great churches do things this way. Why don't you try it?
Yeah.
But my favorite feedback is when people say, I like it here in Tucson and this church feels like it's part of Tucson.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
cool.
what we wanted. And I don't know exactly how to describe that. If you'd have to, I guess, come hang out in Tucson for a month, and then
Yeah.
you kind of feel what that means. But Tucson it's kind of a big small town. It is post-Christian. We're kind of the younger sibling of Phoenix, which is one of the biggest cities in the country, and we like that we're not that generally. Even though every once in a while we go, yeah, but we would like a little more of the jobs and a little more of the amenities. But Tucsonans, and I should say there's like kind of a core of Tucson and then a donut around it that's, I think, a little more detached from the culture.
Mhm.
But the core of the city, there's a lot of appreciation of the arts, not as much emphasis on earning potential, more on doing what's meaningful.
Mhm.
I think a lot more, yeah, openness to considering ideas, but also with a little chip on the shoulder about having things imposed on us. A little grimier, a little slower to act, a little more like take time, get to know me.
Yep.
Yeah, things of that nature. But our church has tried to take some cues from the city, and we asked the question, what would it look like for a group of Christians to grow up out of Tucson soil? That's what we brainstormed in the beginning. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Great. Yeah, I know where you are, but I don't know that part of the world at all. I've been to LA, been to Tennessee and the Deep South and those kind of parts of the world, but yeah, haven't been to Tucson.
yeah. I mean, LA culture would be closer than Tennessee, but it's still, yeah, quite different. I think people from Tucson might, if they feel like Tucson's too small, they might want to go to LA. And then if somebody's been in LA for a long time and they just want to get to what feels like a small town compared to LA, they might come to Tucson.
Yeah, gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah, something like
Nice,
that.
nice.
So yeah, that's our. Again, I know that's a fuzzy description of the church, but I think that's the most important piece. Is
I
that
hear you.
yeah,
We probably were that in our community where we are now. We were an old fishing village, and we were a very earthy, simple kind of church. But what's actually happened is suburbia has caught up.
yeah,
Some of we don't have mega churches like you do, but some of the franchise churches, if you want to
sure,
call them that, have moved in, and
yeah,
they're putting on all the stuff that makes people go, oh nice. And we're kind of that church. It's kind of simple, bit lame even at times.
yeah,
We can't deliver some of the stuff those big churches can, so
yeah,
we're having to go. Okay, this is our niche. Yeah,
yeah. This is us.
yeah, that's right. This is who we
All we
are.
got.
That's right.
Yeah,
And we don't want to be that other mob either. There's plenty of people doing that other thing.
sure.
So yeah, we got our lane, and we're pretty good in it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's I'm settling into that actually. I think I definitely spent a little time early on. I've planted the church 11 years ago. But I spent a little time early on, being jealous of other churches and stuff like that. And I
Yeah.
didn't want to be, but it happened anyway. But lately I have been kind of more content with the little thing that it is and going, for those who are here, this is great. And we don't need to do the church for everybody. There's versions of that. You can get
Yeah.
your standard Southern Baptists are here as well. You can do that. That's fine, and so on and so forth. But
We're,
being more
we're
comfortable in our own
yeah.
skin.
We're in a different stage of life. So you're still in your early 40s. I turned 61 in about a month. It's really interesting just what changes in that space.
Yeah.
In terms of becoming less ambitious and less
Mm.
concerned about my level of success in ministry. Because I remember we planted our church when I was probably 38, 39, and
Yeah.
I had this idea that I was going to plant the church, write the book, show the world,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
it bombed. We
Yeah.
ended up amongst ourselves and struggled to see people come along. Virtually, two or three people came to faith in 8 years, and it was just. I reckon it was a hideous failure. My wife reckons it was amazing because we engaged the community more than we
Yeah.
ever did before, which was great. But in terms of actually doing what we set out to do, no, we
Yeah.
struggled. And I just had to kind of go, okay, you're not the superstar you thought you were. You're just another bloke having a go. And God used you here, but He may not use you here, and
Yeah.
it's quite humbling. So now I can kind of roll a lot easier with the success demons worked out a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. It does help, doesn't it? Going through it's always kind of painful, but kind of feels like you have to. I've watched some younger ministers lately, and I've thought, yeah, it'll hit them,
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like it's already hit you.
Yeah, I think it has.
Yeah.
Or I'm in the middle of it or something. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
see. There might be
Yeah.
another wave coming. Um, well, Andrew, I probably got to duck out to get to my next thing here.
No, no.
Really
Good to
enjoyed
chat, man.
really enjoyed meeting you, and
Yeah.
thanks for taking time. I think, like I said, Eric and I will tack a little intro, outro onto this, so I'll mention your book and all that.
I'm
But I
over your way, I'll come and
appreciate.
say g'day.
What's that?
If I'm over your way, I'll come and drop in and say g'day. Who knows? And likewise, if you're in Perth sometime.
Oh man, I could be easily convinced, if it's just affording the ticket, but I could be convinced to get to Perth, and I'd love if you came through. Yeah, always know you got a place to stay, so that's it's great to meet like-minded people, and I have a feeling I could learn a lot from you. So,
Good to chat, Andy.
yep, you too. Really appreciate the time, and reach out anytime.
Thanks, mate. See
All
you,
right.
buddy. Bye.